If there is any subject that I feel absolutely inadequate to speak on, it's tonight's subject. And it's not something that I struggle with alone, and it's not my only struggle, but it is a struggle. And so I do not stand here tonight as an expert on this subject. But it is something that we need to discuss, that we need to get a handle on in this understanding of, is it well with our soul or not? For several weeks now, we've been studying our mind, and we still have a lot to dig into in the study of our mind. As a matter of fact, it'll take more time to study our mind than it will any other aspect of our being, our emotions, our conscience, our body. It'll take more time to study our mind. You say, preacher, why? Because every battle that you face in your life begins in your mind. It is the seat of where you are. And so it is a major issue. It's a major topic in the Bible, as we're finding out, has a lot to say about our mind. We've looked at a few things so far. We saw the design of our mind. It's with our mind we have the capability of enjoying and engaging in the world that's around us. But sin has caused a darkening to take place in our mind. What we're finding is that there's a threefold impact on our mind because of sin that entered into the human race and that has been passed down from generation to generation. We found that the mind was deceived. I said we have a very real enemy that wants to trap us in doubt, confusion, perplexity, and embarrassment, all in an effort to defeat us in battle and rob God of the praise that he rightfully deserves. We then saw that the mind was deceived. It has impacted, sin has impacted our righteousness, and it has impacted our relationships. And it has produced within us dirty desires, dishonoring actions, distorted and dangerous delights. And now we're considering this idea of how that the mind was and how the mind is diseased. Specifically speaking, we're talking about the issue of mental health or mental illness. I gave you a definition. Mental illness is a condition where one's ability to think, to feel, to process, and to respond to what is going on inside and outside of an individual is either impeded or it is impacted. We found that our brokenness, because of sin, has made us susceptible to some strange things. The Bible called them strange doctrines, those temptations, those lusts and pleasures, and what the Bible calls diseases and torments. We're finding that there are three elements that contribute to the issue of mental illness. Those that are natural, those things that are worldly, and those things that are demonic. We looked at the natural, we said because of sin, there are natural elements in our life. The problem of death, the process of death, and the product of death, that of depression, despair, devastation, disorder, death, dying, and others. All of which can produce within us the feeling of being unworthy, or it has a sense of destroying our well-being, leaving us helpless and hopeless and feeling unloved. We're now moving into this worldly component, as I've said, because I feel like this is where the majority of our mental health issues struggle. They come from. We found that we don't just inhabit this world, but this world impacts us and we are influenced by the world. This world has the ability to confuse us, to change us, to challenge us, and to conform us into its image. And the effect that the world has on us, it impacts not just our body, but it impacts our soul, our mind, our emotions, and our conscience. We find that many times what we identify as the work of the devil against us is nothing more than the woes that sin unleashed in our world, the wrong decisions that we so often make in this life, and the wrong associations and influences that we so often keep as we journey through this life. When it comes to these worldly contributing components, I said they can be categorized in 5 ways. That of terror, that of tension, that of technology, that of trauma, and that of trying out options, for lack of a better way to put it. We looked at the first one last week, that of terror. We found that we live in a world that is full of fear. The reality is there's a myriad of varieties of fears, and these fears have the ability of dominating our life, causing us to not think clearly, causing us not to respond correctly or timely to things around us, and causing us not to function appropriately. The fears of life can plunge us into a state of depression, of loneliness and withdrawal, of weakness, of worry, of unforgiveness, distrust, bondage, paranoia, and a whole host of other issues. We simply ended last week by saying this, that while fear does exist in this world, God did not create you and I to be dominated by that negative aspect of fear. That's where we pick up here tonight. Again, for time's sake, we'll just read our key text passage in verse number 23 of 1 Thessalonians 5. The Bible says, "And the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. And I pray God your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless unto the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." As part 10 of our study of the mind. I remind you, I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor. I'm trying to utilize resources, and I'm trying to bring out from the Bible helps to having a healthy soul. We looked at terror last week. Tonight, I want to look at tension. Again, I repeat myself, I'm not an expert in this area. You say, why? I still struggle very much with this area, as do every one of us here in this room tonight. So, preacher, what are you talking about when you talk about tension? Let me give you another word that you've probably already gone to, but it's the word stress. Stress. That's what we're talking about when we talk about tension, our struggle with stress. Question, how many of us deal with stress? Yeah, everybody raise your hand. You say, why? If you're breathing, you're dealing with stress. Okay? We all do. You say, why? Well, to put it lightly, and this is absolutely an understatement, our world is stress-filled and our lives are stressful. Now, that's an understatement, I know, but it is an absolutely true statement. I heard of a story of a woman who called in to her pastor one Monday morning. She called the pastor and she tried, and she finally, later on Tuesday, was able to get in touch with her pastor. And when she got a hold of the pastor, she said this. She said, "Pastor, I tried to call you all day yesterday, and I could not get a hold of you." Well, the pastor responded, "Monday's my day off. I was resting." To which the woman responded and said, "Well, the devil never takes time off." To which the pastor rightfully and wisely responded, "Yes. And if I didn't take time off, I'd probably be just like the devil too." Now, the truth of the matter is that most of us are probably more like the devil than we would like to admit to. Okay? You say, why? That this world of stress has pushed us to extremes, wrong extremes, sinful extremes, extremes that hurt us terribly. The word stress itself literally means to be drawn tight. It means to be pressed in. And it's a word that we have kind of made a catch-all word. It encompasses everything from the pace of our life, to the pressures of our life, to the problems of our life, all the way down to the people of our life. I don't know about you, but sometimes there's things in my life that are stressful. And many times I can connect a name to that person, to that stressful feeling. And I'm sure you're nothing like I am, and I'm not looking at anybody specifically in this room here tonight. We talk about being under stress. We talk about facing stressful situations, and we talk about dealing with stressful people. As I begin to study for this, I begin to understand, I need to gain a better understanding as to the types of stress that are out there if we're going to see from a biblical aspect how to respond. And when I begin to dig into the types of stress, I found that there's really only three types of stress. There is, number one, what is identified in the medical field as being acute stress. Not about you, but there's nothing cute about stress. But it's labeled acute stress. And acute stress results from our body's reaction to a new, a challenging, or to an exciting situation. This acute stress is a type of feeling that you get when a deadline approaches. That's what happens when you get home at night and it's 9:30 and all of a sudden you're reminded of the fact, hey, I have a major paper due tomorrow. That is acute stress. It's the type of feeling that you get when you just barely avoided a dangerous situation. I mean, that wreck happened just in front of you, and it could have been you, but it wasn't you, and yet that was a stressful situation. This type of stress is the type of feeling that you get when standing in line to ride a roller coaster. Have you enjoyed riding roller coasters? I do now, but I did not always. You say, why? Well, there was a time when my wise, loving, and caring father took me on the American roller coaster there at, was it Six Flags? It was at Six Flags. It was a wooden roller coaster, and I couldn't have been much more than probably somewhere between Hannah and Abigail's age. Is that a fair statement, Dad? So I was just tall enough to ride it. And here I got into that line of that wooden roller coaster, and it tore me up. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, you're in line, you got that little gut-wrenching feeling inside of you, and you're like, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? I really don't want to. I think I do, but I don't. And then you get on the ride, and you're like, hold on. And then you start hearing that click, 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 click. And you're like, ah! And I was terrified and would not ride roller coasters a majority of my young adult life. You say, why? Because of that fear, that stress as a young child. Now, you say, preacher, what about now? Oh, I will ride any roller coaster you want to put me in the line to now. I begin to understand that stress is what's called an acute stress. And now, what makes it acute? Well, it is an acute stress because of the time that it lasts. This type of stress is a short-term stress. We have the stress coming in, and then we very quickly return to whatever our state of normalcy is. Symptoms of acute stress include that of pupil dilation, that of an increased heart rate, that of a perspiration, that of a fast and heavy breathing. It could be anxiety or perhaps a short-lived lack of sleep, not being able to get to sleep because of that acute stress that's on you. There's a second type of stress, which is called episodic acute stress. Episodic acute stress. Now, preacher, what kind of stress is that? Well, that stress is when an acute stress happens on a frequent basis. This is when you have a repeated deadline. You go to work on Monday and you've got a huge deadline that's got to be filled. And then Tuesday you go into work and you've got a major deadline that's got to be met. And then Wednesday you go to work and you've got a major deadline that's got to be met. There's a repeated over and over process of that stress on your life. It is the high stress of the daily job demands and the expectations that are on you. These are longer than short-term stressors that are in your life. Symptoms of episodic acute stresses include muscle tension. You ever gone through and somebody went to kind of rub your shoulders and they said, man, you are tense. I mean, there's no give. It's like a rock, right? It's tense. There's the feeling of being overwhelmed. Headaches begin to set in. There's consistent high blood pressure. There is the presence of anger and irritability. That is an episodic acute stress. But then there's a third type of stress, and that is what the medical terms chronic stress. And this is simply stress that never goes away. I mean, it is the constant fighting with your spouse or your children. It's the terrible job environment or perhaps the neighborhood that a person lives in, that there's constant fear of something bad and terrible happening. It is just something that doesn't stop, and it keeps us in that high stress state. Symptoms of chronic stress includes weight gain. So, preacher, weight gain? Well, yeah, after all, stressed is just desserts spelled backwards. Okay, and so what do you do when you get stressed? Give me candy, give me cake, give me sugar, give me food, give me stuff because it makes me feel better. These symptoms include insomnia. These symptoms include panic attacks, chronic headaches, that being of more than 15 days worth of headaches in a month. It includes emotional fatigue. The problem with this type of stress is that it happens and it worsens because we feel like there is nothing that can be done to change or to improve our situation. That's the three types of stress. And every stress that is in your life falls into one of those three categories. Together, these types of stress can lead to anxiety disorders. They can produce depression. They can lead to burnout, and they can cause digestive problems, things like ulcers and irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease. And they can produce heart disease and many variety of other things. Preacher, what are you saying? I'm saying stress is a part of life that can become something very difficult in our life. Now, I want to give you just some thoughts here when it comes to this idea of tension in our world and how it impacts us. Number one, I want you to see tonight the load of stress. The load of stress. Now, we talked earlier about this. I asked you the question, how many of you deal with stress? And every one of us in here tonight was able to raise our hand and say, yes, I absolutely deal with stress. Here's my next question. Is stress a good thing or is stress a bad thing? Let's take a poll tonight. Go ahead and get your answer ready. I know you're thinking about it very hard. How many of you tonight would say, I, preacher, think that stress is a bad thing? How many would raise your hand? Okay, we are a crowd divided. How many of you tonight would say, and if you're all watching online right now, let us know. Do you think stress is a bad thing? Say in the comment section right now, I think stress is a bad thing if you think it's a bad thing. All right? How many of you tonight think that stress is a good thing? Okay, we got hands lifted there. If you're online, you can say, I think stress is a good thing. Okay? All right, preacher, which is it? The answer is yes. You say, what do you mean? Stress is a good thing that can become a bad thing. Let me demonstrate. I have here, what? That's a rubber band. Now, in and of itself, is that rubber band good for anything? No. It's not going to accomplish anything right here. What has to be applied to this rubber band to be effective? Stress. You need stress. There has got to be stress on the rubber band in order for the rubber band to be effective. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a good thing, because now the rubber band is accomplishing a purpose. However, if we go beyond that, is stress now a good thing or a bad thing? Okay, it went from a good thing to a very bad thing. And that's how we have to understand stress. We live in a day where our culture says this: avoid stress at all costs. As a matter of fact, there's some very well-known preachers out there that have put books out on how you can live the stress-free life. Can I just go on record and say this? If you live a stress-free life, you're good for nothing. I'm not trying to be mean. But if you live a stress-free life, you're not accomplishing nothing, you're not trying nothing, nothing good is coming from your life. You're probably locked up in your mom and dad's basement, trying to stay away from all interaction with people, still on their insurance. I mean, not paying for anything. You say, why? Because life includes stress. You cannot get away from it. As a matter of fact, if you talk to biologists, here's what they will find. Any type of animal needs stress in their life. And that extends to humans. It extends to us. You and I need a certain level of stress in our life to be healthy. Stress is not necessarily a bad thing. You see, when we think of stress, we most often do so from the perspective of an outside force or an outside pressure that has been or that is being put on a certain object or an individual. It is a force against me. It is a weight. It is something that I'm having to carry. It's something that I'm having to do. But stress includes much more than that. You see, stress is not just used to measure the external force being put against something. Stress is also used to determine the internal strength of an object or of an individual. We can utilize the study of metals. If you study metals, here's what you'll find. They use stress to determine these two things. And there's two terms that they associate with it. They use the first term, yield point, and they use the second term, failure point. Yield point, failure point. I don't have another rubber band here tonight. Maybe I can show you utilize this one. Yield point. The yield point is the point at which the stress on the material actually makes the material stronger. So here we have the rubber band. Is it at yield point currently? No. Is it now at yield point? Yes, because it has been used. There's pressure, there is stress applied to it that has made this material stronger. That's the yield point. The failure point is the point at which the strain exceeds the load-bearing capacity. Preacher, what are you saying? I'm saying that we all were created by God to bear a certain level of stress, but we all have a breaking point when it comes to the level of stress that we are under. And so stress is a good thing, but stress has the potential to become a very bad thing. Now, when it comes to our design, our body, God designed us. It's interesting to think that when God designed our body to handle and to respond to stress in our life. Now, I'm getting ready to give you some terms that you may or not be familiar with. I'm not going to describe them. I'm not going to go into detail about these. What I want you to understand is that you are created to handle stress. So, preacher, how do you know that? Well, God gave you what is called the brain cortex. Gave you the brain cortex. And the brain cortex, it interacts with what is called your limbic system. And when your brain cortex reacts with your limbic system, it then activates our endocrine system and other body functions. As it activates, that brain cortex activates the limbic system, the limbic system, which then activates the endocrine system. Your body then releases a hormonal response to the external pressure that's in your life. It is that hormonal response, again, that came through your endocrine system, that was activated because of your limbic system, that was activated because of your brain cortex, that happens in a snapshot of a second, in a second's notice. Boom! Now you get this hormonal release that triggers either a fight or flight response. Preacher, what is that? That is God's design to help you handle stress. That's why when you touch a hot stove, what do? Why? Your brain cortex has activated your limbic system, which activated your endocrine system, which activated the hormonal response that said, get your hand off the stove. Okay? That's God's design to help you handle stress. Now, what does that mean? That means that the sovereign God knew that your life and mine would be filled with stress. And He designed our body with the capability of responding to stress appropriately. As a matter of fact, it was Jesus Himself who said in Matthew 6 in verse number 34, "Take therefore no thought for tomorrow, for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself." Here's what He says. "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." Preacher, what are you saying? I'm saying that every day of your life, God has allowed and God has actually allocated a certain level of stress for your life. Every day. You say, God has done that? Yes. Why? Because you were designed to need and to handle appropriately, again, here's the key, a certain level of stress. Now, where does the problem come in? The problem comes in when we start to borrow stress today, or that was meant for tomorrow, or we actually add stress that was not intended for our today or tomorrow. That is absolutely a possibility in our life. Preacher, what are you saying? Well, let's look at these types of stresses that come in on a daily basis. Number one, there is inherited stress. There is inherited stress. Preacher, what is inherited stress? Inherited stress is stress in our life that is due to no fault of our own. It was inherited. Can I go on record and say three things? My dad is a stressful person. That's one. My mom is a stressful person. That's two. My brother is a stressful person. That's three. And through no fault of their own, of my own, my dad's stress came into my life, my mom's stress came into my life, and my brother's stress came into my life. Why? Because I was born into the family. I didn't have any choice in that. That is inherited stress. We live in a nation, we'll talk about it this way, Josiah and I were talking about yesterday, as a nation, we've now crossed the 33 trillion debt mark, right? 33 trillion debt mark in the United States of America. What is that? That is an inherited stress for not only our younger generation today, but many multiple generations to come down the road. That is an inherited stress through no fault of their own. Well, can I just be bold? Can I just say it bluntly like it is? Because our generation can't live on our own dime, we're living off the back of the dimes of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Because we're being irresponsible, we now are loading up stress, inherited stress, on the next generation who was not meant to carry it in the first place and who now has that stress through no fault of their own. There are financial stresses that are inherited stresses. You say, what do you mean? A loved one passes away and you have that debt that now is passed on, right? There's inherited stress, family, there's health stressors. Do you realize that there are children today who have health stresses in their life through no fault of their own? Mom was drinking alcohol when she was expecting a baby. Mom was on drugs when she was expecting a baby. Dad hit mom when mom was expecting with a baby. Now listen, all of those things are terrible tragedies, but what does that do? That invites stress, health-wise, into a person that just inherited it. No fault of their own. It just happened. There's inherited stress. Then there is interactive stress. So if inherited stress is stress that comes into our life through no fault or decision of our own, then interactive stress is stress that is simply caused by us relating to the world that is around us. How many of you, life stresses you? That's right. That's true of me. So, preacher, what in the world are you talking about? Well, we're stressed by time, aren't we? In our life, right? We measure our life by time. Yeah, you ever said this? If only I had more time. My mom asked me the other day, she said, son, what can I do to help you? And my answer was this: give me 32 extra hours a week. You say 32? Yeah, and I still don't think that would be enough, right? You say, why? We're stressed by time. That's why we come rushing in. Remember, again, I'm not an expert in this field, okay? I'm just telling you what we find in the Bible. I struggle with it. There's stress of time. Why? Because Sunday's always coming, and Wednesday's always coming. The deadline's always coming. There's always something that has to be done. There is stress connected to time. There's stress connected to tasks. Preacher, that's the result of sin. No. Why? Because you needed stress in your life. Remember, God designed us to have a certain level of stress in our life. Well, preacher, when did that take place? The moment Adam was created. What did God do? God put Adam in the garden and said this: keep the garden. What was that? That was stress. Now, the stress was much more manageable. It wasn't overbearing. It wasn't overwhelming. But there was the physical exertion of his time and his energy to accomplish a task. That was before sin came in. Okay, so we can't say stress is the result of sin, right? Because we were designed for a certain level. And yet we find that tasks, responsibilities, produce stress. What about temptations? Does temptation not produce stress? Oh, absolutely. There's an internal struggle. There's a battle on the inside of us. Should I do this? Should I not do that? I want to get victory over it, but I don't feel like I can get victory over it. There's a war inside of me. Paul says that I find myself doing what I really don't want to do and not doing what I really should do. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:13, there is no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. We find that there's stress caused by trouble, caused by trials, and caused by tribulation. I mean, things happen in our life and there's stress. A loved one gets sick, we get sick, and there's stress. We look at the bank account and there can be stress. We're going through and we get let go from our job and there's stress. These are just stresses that come with interacting with the world that is around us. You cannot avoid stress. 1 Peter 4:12, beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. What's he saying? Stress is going to come into your life. So we find here there's inherited stress. That's stress that comes into our life through no fault of our own. There is interactive stress. That's just stress that comes into our life by interacting with the world around us. It just happens with time and task and temptations and troubles and trials and all those things. But there's a third kind of stress, and that's what we call induced stress. Induced stress, or you could call it invited stress. Now, what is induced stress? Well, induced stress is stress that we invite into our life through our own decisions, through our own thoughts, through our own words, through our own actions, or our own inaction. To understand the idea of induced stress, I've highlighted the entire time, God designed you to need a certain level of stress every day of your life. Induced stress is stress that goes beyond the daily needed and the daily allotted or allocated stress in your life. This is excess stress that we have opened the door to. We've done it. We've said, hey, come on in. I can handle you too. And then we go, whoa, boy, I didn't think it'd be that bad. When we talk about the dangers and the difficulties of stress, this is the category, this induced stress, that we most often are talking about. When we talked about stress, my kids, especially the older two, raised their hand and said, yep, I battle stress. Right? Sometimes that stress is because there's a paper due tomorrow, and they've known about it for a month. I mean, they had papers on it. The teacher's been talking about it every day. There's been emails sent home. There's been mom and dad come along and saying, hey, you got this paper to work on. You got this paper to work on. It's due by this date. Hey, have you started? Have you tried? Have you researched? Have you worked? Have you done anything? It's coming up. And then the night before, they're stressed. Why? Because my paper's due and I haven't done the first thing to it. What is that? Induced stress. That's stress that I invited myself. Why? Because I'm a procrastinator. Because I kept putting off what I knew to do in a timely manner, and then when it came time for it to be done, the stress that I did not have to put myself under now was put on me. Ladies, you realize that you can be the stress, the cause of stress in your husband's life? You say, why? Listen, we men were fine until women came along. I'm just saying. Sometimes you ladies, you know where the button is. And you push it. And you push it. Now, just the same way, husbands, you can very much be the stressor in your wife's life. And here's the What if our kids just said, I love it. What? Listen, men can be stressors too. You say, why? Because we know certain things get under our wife's skin. And what happens? We do it because they got under our skin. I'm just letting you know the secret. So what's the story? Ladies, stop getting under our skin and we'll stop getting under yours. No. I stay in trouble, okay? Pretty sure what he's saying. I'm saying we can become the stress in each other's lives. Hey, parents, do you realize that you can be the stress, a cause of stress in your children's life? Hey, kids, let's practice. Say a big amen right there. Parents can be the cause of stress in your life. Amen. They can. They can. You say, what do you mean? Sometimes we adults don't do well with handling the stress in our life. And who do we take it out on? We take it out on our kids. I mean, we do. We yell at them when we shouldn't. We treat them poorly when we should treat them better, but we're stressed, and it's under our skin, and we don't know how to handle it in our lives, so we offset it to them. Hey, kids, do you realize that you can be the cause of stress in your parents' life? No. Amen. No. Amen. You say, what do you mean? I wake up in the morning. This morning was great. I got up. Just my daily routine. The kids and Kim were heading out the door to go to school, and I got up. First thing I do. My kids have heard me say this more than they would love to admit, I'm sure. I say this: start from clean. Start from clean, right? You guys know that phrase well. Start from clean. Start from clean. What does that mean? You start from clean. First thing I do when I get up, most days, 99% of the time, boys and girls, my kids, what do I do? Before I get to the house, what do? I start with my room. I get up, my bed's made. Before I eat breakfast, my bed's made. Before I get that cup of coffee, my bed's made. That's it. I get up, I start from clean. Why? I know I've accomplished something. And then I open the door, and what's the second thing I do? I look in the kids' room. And in a lot of times, there's my stressor. I look into the girls' room, I look into the boys' room, and I go, oh man, there's clothes all over the floor, there's toys all over the floor, the bed's not been made, I mean, there's, oh.
I tried to make my bed. I do.
What I'm trying to say is this, guys. We all can contribute to the stress of each other, but we also invite stress into our own lives. Our relationships are stressful because we don't distance ourselves from the unhealthy relationships that are contributing to the elevated level of stress. We are stressing our schedules because we've over-involved ourselves or we've over-committed ourselves to things that are now stressing us through and through, and we can't handle the new level of stress that's been brought into our life. Richard, what are you saying? I'm saying, look, every day of your life is going to have stress. You were designed to handle it. But the stress that you're complaining about is the induced stress. It is the stress that you have invited. It's the stress that you have added because of your decisions, because of your thoughts. Hey, I can invite stress into my life when I go and I begin to have that little sniffle, and there's that little ting on the back of my throat. I go to WebMD and I can create so much stress in my life by going to WebMD and saying, ooh, I'm going to die. I mean, I've got a little itch in my nose, but I'm going to die because I've got some rare skin disease that you only get in southern Antarctica that was there 6,000 years ago, that's been buried in ice, and that finally, one of the researchers, they unearthed it, they defrosted it, and it came all the way here to Glade Spring, Virginia, and I know it got me, and I'm going to die because I got an itch on my nose. What have I just done? I've just put Richard, you're taking, I'm trying to help you understand what we do. Do we not do that? We do. And then we blame everybody else for our problems when we're the ones who invited the extra stress into our life in the first place. There's tension. We find the load. We find the limitation. Stress often creates the feeling of either being alone in your struggle or being the only one that can contribute to your solution. Truth is, God did not design you to go through life alone, and yet excessive levels of stress cause you to feel like you have to do life alone, or it blinds you to the help and to the support that God has placed around you to help you carry the burden and to accomplish the task. That's why Peter said in 1 Peter 5, casting all your care upon him. Why? For he careth for you. The truth is that different people were designed to handle different levels of stress. I don't think I'll get in trouble for this. I can handle a much greater stress load than my wife can. Right statement? Fair statement? I can. You say, why? God designed me that way. Gave me bigger shoulders, gave me the ability to carry more, to go on less sleep, to maybe not eat this time or that. That's just the way I'm designed. That's just the way, and some of that's just the way I was taught. I mean, that's how Dad was. Dad was the ox that carried the load. Literally, I remember seeing Dad throw the couch up over his shoulder and carrying it through the yard to put it up in the shed. I think it was going to the shed. Was that going to the shed? I think so. I mean, Dad just grabbed it right in the middle and went, boom. I'm like, whoa. God designed me and my family because He knew that my family needed to be able to rely on my ability to carry and handle that level of stress. Now, I'm not saying that you're wrong, that you're out of place if you can't carry the same level. God designed you to carry a certain level of stress every day. And what you understand is you weren't designed to carry that load alone. What are the liabilities? I think there's three. There's weakness, there's weariness, and there's wreaking havoc in your life and the lives of others. Isaiah 40:30 says this, even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. I know I need to close. Our time is come and gone. We've seen the load. We've seen really the loneliness, the limitation. We've seen the liabilities. But I want you to see in closing tonight the loosening. I want you to understand I did not say loosing. I said the loosening from stress. I've already said it, but you cannot avoid stress altogether, nor should you. However, what you and I need to learn to do is to loosen unnecessary stresses that we have invited into our life. Luke 10:38 says, now it came to pass as they went that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she said she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving. And came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered, said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful. And Mary hath chosen that good part which shall not be taken away from sin. Did Christ identify Martha's stress as sin? No. Was Martha stressed? Yeah. Did Martha's stress create a limitation? Yes. Did Martha's stress create a liability? Yes. She felt weak. She felt weary. And what's she doing? She's picking on her sister. She's trying to get her sister in trouble. Why? Because she's not involved in the stress that she was. And what does Jesus say? He says, Martha, you're cumbered. You're distracted from what really matters the most. And Mary has chosen to sit at the feet of Jesus. Preacher, what are you saying? I'm saying a lot of the stress in your life could be handled a lot better if you and I simply learned to spend time sitting in the presence of our Savior. Here's what Isaiah 40:28 says. Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard? That the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of His understanding. He knows everything in the world. He knows everything in your life, and God never gets weary. He never gets worn out. He never succumbs to the issue of stress. But here's what He says. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might, He increaseth strength. Preacher, what are you saying? I'm saying that when it comes to our mental health, terror, fear can contribute negatively. But so can tension. It's needed. It's necessary. There's been a certain allotment of it, allocatment by God in your life every single day. But what you and I need to do is stop inviting unnecessary stresses. And we need to learn to loosen the unnecessary stresses that we've already invited. We do that by relying on the wisdom of Christ, the power of God, to give you strength when you feel like I can't handle anything else. Next time we say this, I just need a little bit more time. Just give me some room. How about we say this? I'm dealing with stress, and what I need more than anything is to spend time with my Savior so that I can understand what is necessary and what is not, and let Him give me the ability to start loosening the extras.